Kia ora, Jess. Tēnā tātou katoa. Everyone, awesome to be with you. Yeah, I think we're in a really, really interesting time when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organizations, in our communities. My observation and lived experience as a white Pākehā male, I hold privilege against every dimension of my identity. And when I think about that and working in diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces now, my observation is that, to your point before, the movement, quite rightly, has been focused on those underrepresented and marginalised groups, both within our workforces and in our communities, because they've needed support, and they still do, to empower them and provide systems and structures and processes for them to succeed within a system which isn't set up for them to succeed currently, right? But the big observation for me is that we haven't engaged and mobilized the majority groups, people that look like me, that are overrepresented in positions of leadership and have the opportunity to impact strategy, culture within our organizations, processes. And so, this is the thesis behind Mobilize Men as Allies, that if we can engage our majority groups, our men, into diversity, equity, and inclusion kaupapa, then we will see some of those really stubborn data points and pieces of progress that we're probably a little bit impatient to see move. Things like the gender pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap, the participation of leadership, both at a gender and an intersectional level, really change. We're not going to see change if we only focus on supporting those marginalised and underrepresented groups. We're only going to see progress if we unite our whole workforces and give everyone an opportunity to find their place and step into their inclusive leadership during that process. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And it's this whole piece around fixing the system rather than the
Yeah.
women, the underrepresented groups in it. And you're so right, because those that are in the positions of power and influence, the majority, and of course, therefore, with the privilege, are mostly our men. And we need to get to a point in our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work where this is everybody's job. My belief on this, and I've done a lot of work in this space with the women in leadership work that I do, is there's a lot of men that want to get involved, but they're not quite sure how. What's the right thing to do? Some concern and some worry. Is that a space I should be in? What will people think? Will I offend people? And so for me, it's how we move to this point of unity where we're all united around this common goal. And of course, that means engaging everyone around something like this. But how do men find their role, do you think, in going to something like an International Women's Day breakfast?
Yeah, great question. And I get asked this question a lot. I think when we talk about, when you and I talk about this a lot, Jess, we think about the men inside our organizations in a bell curve, if you like. And so there will always be a portion of men in our organizations who are not interested in participating in this. They have really fixed views on it. I'm not particularly interested in working with them on that side of the bell curve. On the other
Neither.
side of the bell curve.
Neither. I see a lot of them on my LinkedIn feed sometimes.
Yeah. On the other side of the bell curve, we have some really amazing active male allies in this space who are taking every opportunity to build their inclusive leadership, to create space for others. But then we have this big majority in the middle. And I think that, and my experience of talking to lots of groups of men, is that they're wanting to find their space to step into, to how they build their inclusive leadership. And there's fear here, right? Of getting it wrong, of being perceived to be mansplaining or stepping into the space where they're not welcome, right? And so part of the Men as Allies program that we are developing and offering is actually creating a safe space for men to explore that. And the first step in that, I think, is to get a few things off their chest, because what I'm observing in lots of conversations that I'm having with men is this fear-based response. That the sands under my feet are shifting. What got me to where I am now in terms of my technical competence? I'm a great engineer, I'm a great lawyer, I'm a great accountant. isn't being as valued now and into the future of work as it once has been, and all of the empathetic leadership styles around collaboration and innovation are really now in demand, and so this question around relevance comes into the picture, and some of the interventions around diversity, equity, and inclusion around targets for women and for people of colour, the majority groups are seeing that as a threat to them. And so we need to have a conversation about this, right? And or else there's going to be sort of this passive resentment going on. And again, that's going to be a barrier for progress. So I think opening up the dialogue around how everyone's feeling, around how our workforces and our workplace cultures are changing, and then what's our role within that is really important.
Yeah, I think that's so key. And it's this acknowledgement, but not assuming, and that's where the listening comes in, because I was reading some research that women are over mentored often, but under sponsored. So there's often this well-meaning, let me help you, I've got some advice for you, rather than what do you need from me and how can I support and what's the best thing for me to do, rather than assume this is going to be helpful for you because it was helpful for me. And I loved what you said about acknowledging the conversation. I know that one of the biggest things in our work that we're doing together in Mobilize, one of the biggest things has been helping men come together to have that conversation, because in this space, everybody's voice needs to be heard and our shared experience needs acknowledging. And of course, men are having a certain experience and women are having a certain experience and other genders are having another experience. And that's all relevant and it's helping us understand each other's experience in a way that it's heard, it's acknowledged, it's manner enhancing. And I think, to our conversations, what we see when that happens is that we can move from this division, this scarcity, this fear-based, zero-sum game. If you're going to get a seat at the table, do I lose mine? Is there enough seats to go around? It moves us from that space to a space of unity. We're all in this together. This is for the good of everyone. And we're all understanding that people have different experiences to ourselves. In the workplace and in life, and therefore how do we best show up to support each other? And I think that's the thing that sets Mobilize and Men as Allies apart, and one of the reasons that I've loved our work to date, and that it's getting traction and getting popular amongst the organizations that we're talking to. You mentioned about the future. I'm keen to kind of just touch on, we've talked a lot to the organizations we're working with about the business case behind this. And I know that, when we talk about some of the stats around inclusive leadership and inclusive cultures and why allyship is such a good thing, some of the stats that surprised me at first were that we're 6 times more likely to be able to predict change and adapt to change as an organization when we have an inclusive culture and inclusive leaders, 6 times more likely to innovate, and we're twice as likely to meet and exceed our bottom line financial objectives. That's pretty good stats, eh? What's your thoughts on sort of, the business case and why this is critical for our organizations?
Yeah, I love that data. It's so compelling, isn't it? Because all of those things for organizations are probably the number one capability that we're looking for now because of the environment that we're operating within. The World Economic Forum is called this environment that we're operating within a polycrisis. And it means that there are all of these different factors influencing our business models and everything that we're doing in terms of doing business. And so, we're on the tail end of the pandemic. We've got all sorts of geopolitical issues happening in and around the world. We're in a recessionary environment and an inflationary environment. And so all of these sorts of things are interconnected, which means we'll never actually probably operate in a business as usual environment again. We're sort of lurching from one crisis to another, and we're leading dispersed teams and hybrid working environments. So the world has changed, as we know. And that means our organizational ability to predict and adapt to change is so critical for our organizational prosperity going forward, and also our ability to innovate. And so that's why we talk about inclusive leadership being the number one capability for the future of work for a number of reasons, but a couple are that our demography is really changing. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, where the future workforce profile is going to look so different to what it does today. We have a really burgeoning, young, amazingly talented Māori and Pacifica community coming into our workforce. 35% of our under 14s are Māori. And so when we have a look at the future profile of our workforce, we're going to have a Māori and Pacifica and Asian migrant workforce in that working age population, and we're going to have an older Pākehā European workforce. And so if organizations aren't transforming the way that they are creating an experience for their Māori and Pacifica and diverse ethnic and cultural backgrounds within their organizations, so that it is an attractive place for them to be, so that their worldview is sought and valued, they won't have a workforce, because our diverse talent won't want to come and work for them. And so, this is a really critical commercial business case now, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not, I like to say, we're taking it out of the lunchrooms into the boardrooms. There's such empirical data now to prove this case that it needs to be prioritized within organizations quite urgently, because of the way our country and our customers and our stakeholders are changing.
Yeah. Oh, and it's so true. I mean, I've worked in the leadership development space for 2 decades now, which makes me sound a lot older than I feel. Um, and it's changed hugely over that time. And what 20 years ago, what we looked for in our leaders is a lot different now. And of course, that makes sense, because the world is a lot different now, and so are our workforces. And inclusive leaders are going to be the leaders of the future. And I think what that means, and why this is so terrifying for some, what that means is, if we don't upskill as leaders, if we don't change how we lead and adapt to the future of leadership, and create some of these skills that we need, we're going to get left behind. And that can be a really difficult place to be, particularly if you've been in leadership for the last 30 years and you kind of feel like you're at the expert space where you've got the experience and you know everything, because everything has changed. And it's almost like this constant evolution and relearning. And I love the difference between vertical growth and horizontal growth is how we kind of explain the future of leadership. And I think the beauty of Mobilize and activating allies is not just that we get great male allies in our workplace, it's that we also equip our future leaders, the majority of which are still male. We equip the leaders to lead for the future and become inclusive leaders, which not just helps them, their team, and their organization. And historically, we have focused very much on that horizontal growth, all of our technical skills. It's often what we've trained decades to do, and it's got us into the leadership roles that we're in. And yet, that's often the stuff that we're now seeing AI coming in to replace. All the stuff that can be taught. It's that vertical growth, which is often the continuous improvement, evolution of development and skills, and of course, personal knowledge and growth that sets us apart. Some of that emotional intelligence, inclusivity, knowing ourselves, understanding others, being curious, having understanding from an empathy perspective, but also sharing experiences and listening to the stories of others. That's going to be the skills of the future that our leaders will need. That's going to be the stuff we're going to be interviewed on at our next for our next role. So if we don't reskill and continue this vertical growth, then we do risk getting left behind. And I think that's a massive why for leaders to get involved in this work. Yes, we get great allies, and that helps everybody. But we're also helping ourselves through this as well in our own leadership development.
Yeah, completely agree. I think there are two main benefits here in terms of building a network of male allies within our organizations. One, for the participants. So I talk about inclusive leadership is the antidote for the fear that men are facing around how the world is changing. So if you're worried about your leadership relevance, then building your inclusive leadership capability, building the skills and capabilities in your leadership kitty, which will allow you to lead really effectively in a diverse and changing workplace climate, that is going to future-proof you against that change that you're worried about. And for organizations, having inclusive leaders within your organization will naturally create more space for everyone. right? And so we'll start to see more diverse ethnic and cultural and gender identities come into leadership positions because everyone's having an inclusive mindset across the organisation culture. And so, you know, benefit to the individuals. They're going to be more relevant, more future-focused leaders. Better for organisations because we're going to embed inclusivity into the culture, and that will have outcomes for everyone, particularly those that have been underrepresented and marginalised up till now.